No facial recognition software. What an appropriate title this Sunday, following last Sunday, when a group of young men climbed into several helicopters to identify a person of interest. And they had their needles and syringes all set to take blood so they could check DNA. But the first thing they were going to do was check facial recognition. Black ops people, they politely call them special ops. But they're black ops. They go in at night, they do what they need to do, and they leave. And let's be clear about what happened last Sunday. No matter what you hear, their orders were that if he were there, he was not to leave the room alive. Sort of like we hear in the Easter story just before Easter. Jesus, the one we call Christ, was not to leave Jerusalem alive. It wouldn't work. He had, after all, been identified as King of the Jews. The Romans couldn't have that other king of the Jews running around. It would just mess up the way they were ruling Palestine. And Palestine was hard enough to rule without extra kings running around. And the priests and the Levites, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Pharisees, they didn't want that Messiah running around. He was messing with salvation economy. The priest didn't want somebody going around saying, move your hand, you're healed. See, you're not blind anymore. Stand up and walk. It messed up the way people did it. Because how do you do it the way we've always done it? You go to temple on days like Passover, or for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Chanukah, Sukkot, and you either bring an unblemished animal or you buy one, and you sacrifice it, and then a blessing is proclaimed and you're all better, or not. And there was this guy, Jesus. We all recognize him, right? He looked just like that. We don't know what Jesus looked like. There was no facial recognition software. No one drew a picture of him. He came and went. And then he came again. Last week we heard he walked into a locked room. Or he was just there in the locked room. Depends upon how you interpret that slippery Greek language. And he said, peace, and blew on them, and they were lit up with fire. Today we hear about two people on the way from Jerusalem to another town. And here's this guy who just joins them. And starts talking to them. What are you talking about? What happened in Jerusalem? Was he testing them to see if they were paying attention? Was he testing them to see if they recognized him? Was he just asking to see if they were paying attention when he said important things? And they apparently didn't get it yet. They went into a tavern, an inn, a service station, and they got milk, cheese and bread, maybe wine. And he took a loaf and he broke it and he blessed it. And suddenly they remembered. They remembered who it was and whose they were. This is my body. I broke it for you. And then he went away. And they're left scratching their head, getting it finally. And they rushed back, according to Luke, and met the 11 and their associates. Because remember, when Jesus sent them out 2 by 2, he sent out 72. So we can't forget the other 61. And they told him all the things that had happened, and then they hear what happened in Jerusalem. He appeared to us. He appeared to Simon. Storytelling is how we recognize Jesus Christ. The stories we all know. Remember that old song? Oh, do you? You think I'm going to tell you? No. I mean, each of us has an old song about Jesus. If my grandson were here today, after church, when he thinks most of you are gone, he'd pull one of these chairs up here. He'd make sure the mic is on. And he'd sing, Jesus loves me, this I know. And then he'd say it again. He likes that part of it. He doesn't care about the rest of it. We all have a story that reminds us who Jesus is. We don't need to check DNA. We don't need to look Jesus face to face because like these two and like those 12 and like those 72, probably wouldn't recognize him anyway. I know how that is because I'm world famous in Hollywood even now. Some of you are old enough to remember Bobby Sherman. Some of you even probably still have one of his albums. If you're lucky, I'll sign it. I've practiced. I can do it just like he does. While he and I were in Hollywood together, I got all his phone calls. Both the clean ones asking for dates where he would come singing, and the not so clean ones who want to discuss with him all sorts of inappropriate things. So I know what it's like to be famous and have absolutely no facial recognition. Because he and I could be standing together and everybody would go to him. He's shorter, he's got more hair, and he still sings soprano. Who is Jesus Christ on your way? Where do you see Jesus Christ on your way? I had a young man in a congregation I served, and we'll call him Kevin, because that's his name. Kevin said he saw Jesus every time I led worship when we got to the prayer of confession. I don't think Kevin sinned that much. But that was the place where he recognized Christ present every single Sunday. So I always have a prayer of confession, even if I figure we're relatively sin-free. You remember the story about Martin Luther, right? He would go to his confessor 8 or 9 times a day, confessing to sins. And finally his confessor said, Martin, would you go out and commit some of these sins before you confess to them? So Martin Luther's new theme became, go and sin boldly. Because for him, in the forgiveness was where Jesus came to him. By grace alone. For others, it's in the music. Excuse me. I once had a congregation ask if I sang. And I said, I can, but I don't. But in their congregation, in the singing was where God showed God's self in Jesus Christ. Kevin's wife, we'll call her Kathy because that's her name, said she recognized Jesus every time I stood up to preach because there was a big halo. Is it still there? It's not? Well, the reason there was a big halo because there was a window right there through which the reflected sun came every single time I stood up, and it went right past me to where she always sat. That's why we always sit in the same place, right? I tried to tell her that I wasn't that good and there was no halo. And yet she saw it every Sunday. Remember, here's the toughest piece. Each of us is writing a gospel of Jesus Christ. A chapter every day. We are the only Jesus some people will see. We are the only gospel they will ever read. What is the gospel? According to